I didn't mention this before, but we're in Pattaya, Thailand.
Yes, we are.
And we're going to talk a little bit about Pattaya, Thailand, and Anthony's impressions for his first month place here. Yeah, I think he'll have a few things to say. So you're going to want to, you know, if you've heard the term sexpat, and he's not, and I am, he's not, and so if you want to stay tuned for that video coming up next. All right, ciao. So this is Anthony Colpo, as you know, and what's your anthonycolpo.substack.com?
Substack.com.
And I'm Richard Nikoley, freetheanimal.com. And some of you know both of us really well. Some of you know me, not Anthony so much. Some of you know Anthony and not me so much. So just to brief, Anthony just about 1 month ago came to Thailand with the intention of getting his retirement visa, which has been done. We've spent the last month just about every day a few hours, you know, gym and doing this and that thing. And today we're out on a hike, and I thought, well, let's start doing some video footage. So what should we talk about? Well, how about the elephant in the room, which is low carbohydrate diets. So that is
straight to making enemies.
Straight to making enemies. Well,
nothing got heady like Thailand.
Okay, so a couple of aspects to cover first. So let's cover the metabolic advantage thing first, and calories in versus calories out. Correct me if I'm wrong, Anthony, but there's plenty of metabolic ward studies, which you can explain what that is, that test both overeating, maintenance eating, and undereating. And even though if you say a calorie is not a calorie, it's not exact as precise, well, according to Einstein, neither is Newton. But yet we can go to the moon and back on Newtonian physics, I believe, right? We don't need calculus to get to, we don't need relativity.
This whole, calorie is not really a calorie, because when I started commenting on all this, pointing out the flaws and the metabolic advantage theory, I started getting like pushback. Oh, but a calorie from polyunsaturated fats is different to a calorie from saturated fat. So they were sort of going for the minutiae, you know, trying to. And the thing is, first of all, the difference is minimal. Yeah, if you place these foods in a calorimeter, it might be 1.7 of a calorie difference. It's, in the overall scheme of things, it means nothing. But the other thing that I found quite amusing, or bemusing, was that people who brought up this argument were happy to seize on the studies that they thought showed low carb diets at similar caloric intakes cause greater weight loss. So they never had a problem with, you know, the exact measurement of calories.
Yeah.
When these studies they thought were showing that low carb diets cause greater weight loss at the same calorie level. So
have your cake and eat it too.
Yeah. So, you know, you can't have your cake and eat it too. Yeah. But yeah, there's been ward studies dating back to 1935.
So what's a ward study?
So ward study, okay, so most of the studies that you see reported in the media, and most of the studies you see that were quoted by the low carb advocates, were what they call free living studies. So a free living study is where you put out the call, you're doing a study, you'd like a bunch of volunteers, and so people will answer the advertisements, they'll come in, you select what will be the final sample, and you then you randomise those people to a low carb group, and the other group will be randomised to either follow their normal diet, or they might be instructed to specifically follow a high carb diet. So you've got two groups that have been randomised to one or the other group, and they are then instructed to follow that diet for a set period of time. There's also another version called a crossover study, where you'll get a group of volunteers and they'll be assigned in random order to actually follow the same two diets, but in random order. So they might do 8 weeks on one diet, there might be a 2-week or 4-week washout period, whatever the case may be, and then they'll spend 8 weeks on the other diet. So actually every person in the study actually follows both the diets. And the advantage with that type of study is that every person follows both diets, so you can't, or it makes it harder to sort of point to baseline differences as the explanation for any disparity in the results.
But now the the big distinction with a ward study is that you're not relying on what people said they eat.
So with a free living study, you can be as excruciating and pedantic as you want in the instructions you give the participants, but once they leave your research facility and go out in the real world, you have no control. You can even give them food, because some free living studies do actually give the volunteers packaged food. You know, eat this for breakfast, lunch, dinner. That doesn't stop them from, you know, stopping at 7-Eleven or whatever on the way home.
Donuts.
Dunkin' Donuts or Burger King or whatever, and supplementing their diet with extracurricular foods, and it happens. It absolutely happens.
Yeah.
So the purpose of a ward study is you get people and they are housed in a research facility, usually a metabolic ward at a university is the most common setting. And basically those people are under your supervision. You're watching them, you know, ideally 24 hours a day. There are some ward studies where people are allowed out to work during the day. The thing with a ward study, they're hard to do because you need to, you know, find people who are prepared to live in a ward for the duration of the study.
It's kind of like jury duty.
Yeah. So in some studies, you know, in order to recruit participants, they've had to allow them to go off to work during the day. So you could argue, well, how do we know what they're eating during the day? But it's a more controlled scenario than a completely free living study.
It's just a little bit better, right?
But there have been ward studies. There have been quite a few where the participants have been housed, you know,
now,
pretty much kept under.
Tell me about all the ward studies where they tested overeating, maintenance eating, and undereating, and found unpredictable results. In other words, the calories and the weight gain or loss didn't match up at all. How many of those ward studies are there that didn't match up at all?
Well, the only thing that doesn't match up, sometimes you do get differences in weight loss, but it's entirely,
well, of course they're going to be.
It can be explained by differences in water loss.
Yeah.
And see this group, the low carb has lost 2 kilos more. Yeah, they dropped 2 kilos more of water because they were depleted in glycogen. You know, when you go on a low carb diet, it tends to lower your glycogen stores. Yeah. And for every gram of glycogen, there's a certain amount of water that has to, you know, that accompanies that. So when you go on a low carb diet, you lose glycogen, you lose water.
Also, if they're in a ward, it would be. They may have done these studies, but in a ward doesn't mean you're also in a, what do they call it, a metabolic chamber?
No.
Yeah, where that's where they can measure your
chamber,
total.
Like a smaller room where you're actually having your calorie expenditure and input closely monitored. A metabolic ward is just like a confined facility where you have to stay there for the duration of the study, and they make sure that if you're in the low carb group and let's say they're testing 1,000 calorie per day diet, the low carb group gets exactly 1,000 calories per day, the high carb group gets exactly 1,000 calories per day.
It's kind of like in the movies where they show scenes from a nut house or an old folks home, that kind of thing, right? So
the only real difference, you know, on different diets of similar or identical calorie intake, if you eat a higher protein intake, you often see what they call a repartitioning effect. So the overall weight loss won't really differ. What will differ is the high protein group will retain more muscle and lose more fat, which is a good thing. Yeah. It's like a favorable recompositioning or repartitioning effect. Mm-hmm. So the overall weight loss will still be the same because ultimately both groups are eating identical calorie intakes. So higher protein intake, yes, you get, but again, you don't need to be following a low carb diet to eat a high protein intake. Yeah. You can. Athletes and bodybuilders do it all the time, eat high carb and high protein.
That's a perfect segue into, play. You're not, explain yourself a little bit. It's not that you're against low carbohydrate diets. You are against, well, first of all, we're omnivores, right? So there's no necessity that people need to particularly restrict carbohydrate. Yeah. But at the same time, let's put it this way, like if you if you want to get a low carb diet to work for you, how do you do that?
If you're going on a strict, like these carnivore type, these all meat diets, I'd really strongly recommend getting some green vegetables in there. Just to get some potassium.
Some of them are putting some honey and fruit in the mix now.
I'd say a good multivitamin, multi-mineral, you know, with emphasis on things like magnesium, even sodium, because those diets tend to have a strong diuretic effect. With strong diuresis comes excretion of important minerals, so I'd really be keeping, you know, tabs on my mineral intake.
Yeah, and coconut water is a great electrolyte drink.
But yeah, asking me what should someone on a low carb diet, it's like asking me what should someone on a vegan diet do. I don't really recommend either of them. It's not, I don't have a high opinion of either of them. Am I anti-low carb or anti-vegan? Well, I just don't think they're optimal eating approaches. If you want to eat a vegan diet or a low carb diet, because they seem to be the two groups that, you know, seem to hate me most. But at the end of the day, you're a grown adult. You eat whatever you want. Yeah. My issue is all the claims that are being made for these diets. Most of the claims are just nonsense. You're misleading people. It does cause adverse health effects. I mean, look at this, all these vegan influencers. Influencer to me is another word for bad influence. Yeah. They embrace these vegan diets, they made videos about it, they attract, you know, they build up a huge following, and then all of a sudden there's a video why I'm no longer vegan, and they're recounting all the bad effects, and it's like, well, shouldn't you have done your research beforehand? Didn't you stop to think that a diet that eliminates some of our most nutrient-dense foods, foods that we've evolved to eat over millions of years?
That's what I was going to ask. So if you are going to do a vegan diet, what you want to do is find out which vegan foods are the most nutritionally dense, and really kind of front load your diet with that, right? If you insist, right? So that's what we're talking about. If you must, supplementation is crucial on a vegan diet. And I've had a few vegans write to me. You probably have seen on my Substack some rather vocal adamant vegans, and the most recent one was saying, oh, you know, as long as you supplement with actually they both said this, as long as you supplement with B12, and it's like, that's just scratching the surface. B12 is the best known. Everyone knows that vegan diets, or everyone should know that vegan diets, even vegetarian diets, are deficient in B12, because the only truly rich sources of B12 are animal flesh. You know, there is some in dairy and eggs, but the richest sources are, well, richest source is meat. So yeah, you definitely need to supplement with B12 if you're going to follow a vegan diet. So now, let's do the same thing for let's talk about low carb. Carnivore obviously is targeting protein, but say you're low carb and you're deciding, well, am I gonna do what kind of low carb am I gonna do? Am I gonna do what's the so-called nutritional ketosis, which is like 80% calories from fat, and pretty low protein. You're trying to stay like, what is it, 5 to 10% protein, like really minimal protein. And just a little
if
bit of
someone put a gun to my head and said, you have to follow a low carb diet, we're watching you 24 hours a day. All right, what I'd eat fatty meats. When I say fatty meats, like saturate rich meats cooked in my favorite oils like olive oil, butter, coconut oil. And I would make sure that I eat lots of what you could say are alkalinizing vegetables, so greens, whatever tubers I could get away with. I'd shoot for a non-ketogenic, low-carb diet. I'm not a big fan of ketogenic diets.
Targeting protein. I'll make a little distinction. If you're asking me, I'd say I just wrote this in a post. If you must on a low carb diet, and sometimes I do low carb. It can be a meal, it can be a day, it can be a few days, right? I just don't do it. I don't think it's a lifestyle. I think it's a good intervention sometimes for me. But when I do it, I target protein. That's my primary emphasis. Fatty or lean, it doesn't really matter, but because my view is if you hit the protein first, then you automatically push out stuff, right? It's like, even if you have a potato sitting there, if you made a big chunk of meat and you finish the meat, sometimes you say, I'm finished, I'm done. You know, other
Yeah.
times you might eat the potato
Yeah.
or half the potato, you know. And keep in mind that if you're talking low carb also, if you go back to the, you know, maybe not the originator of low carb diet, but the popularizer of low carb diets, Robert Atkins, you know, this really hyper low stuff was only his 2-week induction phase, and then you jumped up to about 60 grams a day, and ultimately 120 and less grams per day was still considered low carb. You know, when you talk about average people probably do 300 to 400 grams of carbohydrate a day. So 120 grams is pretty low, you know. From
Atkins is an interesting. It's interesting you bring him up. He was, like the grandfather of all this. He didn't originate low carb, of course, but I guess he's the most famous low carb guru of all time. One of the most popular diet gurus of all time.
Yeah.
I forget the name of the biography, but I remember it was a female author, and she wrote a biography about Atkins. And apparently the running joke at his office was that he was overweight.
Yeah.
And was it Greg? What's the guy's name? Is it Greg Lovell? He was a low carb. He wrote a book on low carb diets about 15 years ago. Was he the one that went out to dinner with Atkins, and apparently he left his potatoes on the plate, and Atkins goes, "Oh, you going to eat those?" And he goes, "No." He goes, "Oh, can I have them?" He said, "Yeah, go for it." And Atkins demolished his potatoes. So he wasn't he even practiced what he preached.
Well,
a lot of these guys don't.
There's low carb, you know, clinicians, doctors, and so on who oftentimes they've told stories about running into their clients in a restaurant when they're over their big dessert plate, you know. So it goes back to the same thing. You know, how many vegans? Well, if you go back to the vegan thing, you have these vegans who like, oh, I'm a vegan bodybuilder. Yeah, he built it all on an omnivorous, high protein diet, and 2 weeks ago he went vegan, and so now all of his muscularity is a result of vegan. Or you talk,
or something else,
or the health gain. You know, oh, I'm so healthy now, and you started you say you're a vegan, but every once in a while you sneak that burger. You know, people cheat all the time.
Yeah, I look with vegan bodybuilders and strength athletes.
Yeah.
When you get to 130 kilograms,
all right, we're halfway through our hike, and we're gonna stop along the way back for a smoothie with a big view over Pattaya, which I didn't mention this before, but we're in Pattaya, Thailand.
Yes, we are.
And we're going to talk a little bit about Pattaya, Thailand, and Anthony's impressions for his first month here. I think he'll have a few things to say. So you're going to want to, you know, if you've heard the term sexpat, and he's not, and I am, he's not, and so if you want to stay tuned for that video coming up next. All right. Ciao.